Welcome, everyone. This is Liz Faircloth. I'm one of the co-founders of the Real Estate Investor community. I'm your host for today's webinar. I'm excited to be joined by Jessica. Thank you so much for being here, Jessica. Excited to jump into today's topic. What we're going to be talking about is what she's going to be talking about, I should say, not me. What she's going to be talking about is all about, really landing opportunities for yourself to be a podcast. On a podcast, correct, Jessica? And strategies around that. And it's not rocket science, but there's a process and there are important strategies that you need to do. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to join us in the chat box. It'd be amazing for you to share where you're calling in from, where your name, where you're calling in from, what you're excited about learning. I think that's also really, really important because the more we have intentions when we're on calls, the more we can get out of them, because this is your time. Time is of value. We all could be doing other things, but we're not. We're here together. So what would you like to get out of our time together too? You can share in the chat box. Hey, Dawn from San Diego. Dawn's one of our Strive members. Awesome. Thanks for being on, Dawn. Jessica, where are you out of, by the way?
Yeah, so I'm in Rhode Island.
Oh, you're not far. You're an East Coaster. Okay.
Yeah. East Coast. Right. Yeah.
Hey, Michelle from Vancouver, another Strive member. Awesome. Good to see you both on. If you're joining us here, I'd love to invite you to share your name, where you're calling in from, and what you want to get out of our time together with regards to the topic of podcasting. Hey, Tracy, looking to start to do more podcasts and really excited to learn more. Absolutely. This is important information and there's a lot out there. Hey, Wendy from Nashville. All right, I'm going to get started. We like to start on time as for the women that are new to our community. We like to end on time. If you're new to our community, I'd love to, number one, welcome you. I'd love for in the chat box, if you could just say new. So that would be great just to see who's new on our call, who is, been with us for some time. We got some new people. Hey, Michelle, thanks for being here. So I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to throw it over to Jessica here in a moment, and I'll share a little bit about what we're going to be doing together. So I'm going to share just a few slides about who we are for those who are new and what we're up to. Really amazing things we're up to. We're involved in a lot of different things. I just want to make sure you know what's available to you in our growing, intimate, global platform. So number one, just to share with you, we do have a Facebook group for those who are not familiar. It is a free Facebook group where you can really have a safe space to ask questions. We started this with 10 of our friends a few years ago, and now we have close to 15,000 women in that group. It's not about self-promotion. It's really about getting and giving the support that you need. So that's our Facebook group. We have meetups across the country. We have 50 plus meetups now. We have a few in Canada, and we're growing. We're growing every day. So definitely check those locations out. Those are local meetups for you to get the support that you need. So it's more in person and more locally connected. We also have an EXP team for those real estate agents out there. We have a growing team where we're not just committed to realtors growing their business, which we are. We also stand for realtors and real estate agents growing their portfolio and their investments. So that's what we stand for. And that's what we're up to with our team there. We have twice a month, we have free webinars, just like Jessica is doing for us today and teaching today. These are virtual events. I'm constantly talking to people, getting connected to what's happening in the market. What do women need and want right now with everything happening? So just know that we're constantly looking at bringing the best webinars we can to you, and we will continue to do that. And in terms of InvestorCon, I can't believe I'm talking about InvestorCon, but it is excited about next year. For those who don't know, it is June 2nd through 4th in Austin, Texas. Very excited about our next year's event. If you don't have your ticket, you need to get it. So more to come around all specifics around that, but wanted to mention that. And then lastly, we have our Strive mentorship program. I'd be remiss for not sharing this to you. So this is for women who have done 5 to 10 deals or more, who are they're tired of being solopreneurs, and they're looking for a really great mentorship program so they can grow their portfolios on their own terms. And so it's application only. You can apply there. I know we have a couple of our Strive members on our webinar here today. So thanks for being on. But we're really proud of the Strive group that we've built and we continue to build. And we have open enrollment now. And you also get a free ticket. to InvestorCon. So that's just a little bit about what's going on there. There's the code. I will put that in the chat box. Without further ado, excited to jump into Jessica's presentation. So many women undersell themselves, and that's the reason for today's webinar. And I don't know about you, Jessica, but that is something that comes up a lot, where when we started this community 5 years ago, women were under the radar. They were investing, they were doing business, but I don't know about you, they just weren't getting themselves out there. And so podcasting is such a fantastic way to shift that, because we believe that every woman has something to share in the way that you know how to share it. And it's a disservice to the people out there that need to listen to it, that aren't hearing from you, not just to grow your business and raise money and find partners and all the good things that can come from actually exposure, but it's about speaking what's in for you to speak that no one else can speak. So I don't want to take your presentation, Jessica, but I wanted just to thank you so much for being here, and appreciate your time, appreciate your wisdom. And I'm going to come back on in about quarter of, so I can field questions. These webinars are meant to be interactive. That's why they're live. That's why I'm live with you. I'm not a recorded person. That's why Jessica is live. That's why it's noon Eastern time, and we're here live with all of you, so you could ask your questions as they're coming up for you. So please put that in the Q&A box, request that, and then we'll go from there. So Jessica, thanks so much again for your time, and excited about this topic. And without further ado, you have the floor.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. I totally agree with everything you said. It is about growing your business and getting your visibility out there, but it's helping the people. And I'm just so passionate about women real estate investors getting their voice heard, because it's such a male dominated industry. So let's go. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a presentation for y'all, tons of value here, zero fluff, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So we'll just go ahead and share and present. All right. Hold on a second. Sorry. There we go. Present. All right. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction, like 2 seconds, so you know who I am. And in today's webinar, we're going to just go over why podcast guesting. It sounds like you're here because you understand the value, but I just want to lay out some numbers for you so you can see how much this industry, this medium has grown. I have a monetization roadmap for you. We are talking about preparing for podcast interviews, but I can't just talk about preparing without also going over how you can use podcast guesting to grow your business and to monetize your visibility. And we'll also be talking about how to leverage your interviews, because this is the type of strategy that when you invest in getting on podcasts, you are investing in 100 different ways to grow your business. So it's super, super exciting. And then we'll have time for Q&A, and I'll share how you can connect with me. So let's dive into it. So hi, I'm Jessica. I am the founder of Interview Connections. We are the first ever podcast booking agency. So when I started Interview Connections in 2013, 10 years ago, it's our 10-year anniversary, nobody was doing podcast booking. Podcast guesting was not a phrase people were using. So I was the first to market. I have a business partner, Margie. She is our CEO. And yeah, we have 18 full-time employees. We have a local full-time, we're all remote, but we have full-time staff, which is something that sets us apart, as we've got really amazing employees. Personal note, I'm married. I have 2 kids. My kids are 8 and 10. I live in Rhode Island, where we have backyard chickens and cats and gerbils and fish. And so that's what keeps me grounded while I'm not, at the computer talking about podcast guesting. So that's just a little bit about me. So podcast listenership is rising every year. People ask me, like, is it too late to get into this? Is it too early? Is this something I should be focused on? I mean, 2013 is when I started. There were 27 million listeners, 27 million people listening to podcasts. And just look at this growth, 40 million, 55 million, 62 million. It is continuing to go up. So this is the type of thing that it's not a strategy or a medium that is a fad, that it's like a platform that starts and then is it going to just die out in a couple of months? Like so many things we have seen in marketing recently. This is a medium where people are listening to podcasts. They are going to podcasts in droves to get their content, to connect with people, to build relationships. So if I just wanted to show you these numbers so you can see just how much this medium is expanding and growing, and just how many people are becoming podcast listeners. So now let's go through your monetization roadmap. So number one, you have to know your goals for podcast guesting and your target audience. And this is going to inform your show criteria. So what are the results that you want to get out of being a guest on podcasts? Is it to generate leads, to find deals, to hone in on your message, to increase your visibility and grow your email list, grow your brand? Number one, you need to understand and know what your goals are, because if you don't know what your goals are, then you're not going to know what types of shows to go on. You're not going to know what to talk about, because first, knowing your goals and knowing what you want to get out of podcast guesting, that is the first step. From there, who is your target audience? Based off what your goals are, what the results are that you want to achieve, who do you need to be speaking to in order to achieve that goal? And all of this is what helps inform what we call your show criteria. So when we work with clients, like we list out, okay, they're going to go on shows that are speaking to this type of person. They're going to go on shows that are about this topic. They're going to be going on shows hosted by this type of person. So that is really what's going to help make sure your podcast guesting strategy is really intentional and results-based. You want to have that clarity on your goals, your target audience, and that's going to help you know what types of shows to go on. Number two, your monetization roadmap, create a podcast one sheet. I'll show you an example of that in the next slide or two, but your podcast one sheet is a one-pager. It's well-designed and it has your bio, it has interview topics, it has suggested questions that set you up for success. The reason a podcast one sheet is so important and is a really critical part of your journey as a podcast guest is it, number one, it helps you be prepared. So we're talking today about being prepared for your podcast guest appearances. Having pre-written topics and questions will allow you to be prepared because you'll be able to create stories for each topic. You'll understand ahead of time what questions most hosts will ask you. When you get interviewed on podcasts, a lot of podcast hosts will have their own questions. They will have their own curiosities. But if you can give them your one sheet and say, here are the topics I speak about most often, here are the topics that I find to be most commonly asked in this audience, the podcast host will really appreciate that. It's also really important to have a well-written bio because when you are interviewed on podcasts, most of the hosts of the show will read your bio as an introduction. And when listeners are turning on a podcast episode, that intro to the guest is probably in the first few minutes of the episode. So it is the first impression to that episode. And if there is a really well-written bio that really captures the attention of the audience, that is going to have listeners tuning into the entire episode. So your bio should really communicate who you are, who you help, right? What your expertise is, pepper in some facts about your experience that showcases your credibility and why you have the right to talk about this and to be interviewed about this. So showcasing, how many deals you closed, how much you've invested, like whatever the case, what does your target audience need to know about you at a glance to understand that you are somebody that has credibility in this business? So your bio should really encapsulate that. And then interview topics that really set you apart from your target audience, that really showcase your unique expertise. And then suggested questions are questions that are written, in a way that the host could just read them verbatim, and that just makes the host job easier. Number three, give a great interview. Obviously, we want to give a really great interview with a very clear and effective call to action. So at the end of a podcast interview, the host, almost every single time, the host will say, this was great. How can our listeners connect with you? Where can our listeners find you online and learn more about what you do? And that is your opportunity to give a call to action. You want to give a call to action that is one thing, right? So a lot of people fall into that trap of saying, oh, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. This is my website. And there's like a million different places they could go, but most podcast listeners are listening on the go. They're in their car, they're at the gym, they're cleaning their house, like they're listening on their phone. So they're not necessarily going to remember 5 different places where they could find you online. So think about what is that one next stop. If you're basically taking them down a funnel, right? And the very top of the funnel is them hearing about you, learning about you, and hearing you on a podcast. What is the next intentional step on that journey that will get them closer to the bottom of your funnel? That call to action has to be the one thing that is going to increase the number of listeners that get into that funnel. It is ideal if your call to action is something that is free or low cost, because not everyone that hears you on a podcast is going to be ready to make an investment right away. Some will, and they will go right to the bottom of the funnel. They will find their way there. But to maximize conversions and to capture as many names and emails as possible and to get to as many listeners as possible, you want to give them something that gets them into your community. So whether that's a lead magnet, or it could be connecting with you on LinkedIn, there's nothing wrong with sending people to your LinkedIn or to your website, but what is that one thing that will increase the number of people in that audience who are your ideal target audience converting into your ecosystem? And number 4, the 4th step in your monetization roadmap is to take each interview seriously and show up prepared. And I say this because when you're interviewed on podcasts, there is often a trap of, well, this is a free podcast interview. People aren't paying to listen to it. It's just a podcast interview. I'm here. This is 30 minutes of my day. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not having to, dress up and prepare this whole presentation. And a lot of people fall into that pitfall and that trap of not taking each interview seriously, especially in a medium where there is a very low barrier to entry. Anyone can start a podcast, right? I mean, years ago, if you were going to have an interview-based show, you would have gone to broadcasting school. You would have had to get a lot of training. There was a much higher barrier to entry in hosting an interview show. Now anyone can buy a microphone on Amazon, record on Zoom, and publish it for free, and boom, you have a podcast. And so, of course, you want to go on shows where they're more established, they're taking it really seriously. But it's important to remember that there are podcasts where the host may not be an expert interviewer, but that doesn't mean they're not somebody that would be a really good connection for you in business, or they don't have people in their audience that really like their style and like their show and like who they bring onto their show. So take each interview seriously, whether it is a small show with a small audience and it's relatively new, or if it has 500 ratings and reviews and it's a huge platform. When I ask our clients, like, what's your monetization strategy? What do you do to have success? They say, I take each interview really seriously. I show up prepared. Our client, Kristen Bowen, said, I show up to each interview as if every listener paid $10,000 to hear me speak. And that is such a powerful mindset. When you show up to each interview, just really taking it as if everyone paid to hear the interview, you do show up differently. You show up differently to a paid keynote because you know that like you have to show up and give it your all. And I have just found that those mindset and energy shifts make all the difference in how many results and how many leads and sales that you attract from podcast guesting. Podcast listeners are buyers. So 54% of podcast listeners say they are more likely to buy from a brand that they hear on a podcast. So definitely really take this medium seriously. Even if it's a show with 100 listeners versus 5,000, these are people who are highly educated, they're higher income, they are listening because they want to learn. They are also opting in to learn. Versus ads where people are just swiping on social media and they're like, oh, that got my attention, I'm going to opt in for that. When somebody is hearing you on a podcast, they are consciously choosing to listen to your episode. They have chosen to click play. They have chosen to continue listening to the entire episode. So you are getting yourself in front of people who are really hanging on to your words and really listening intently, and they're very engaged, and the stats say they are buyers. All right, so now let's go over your preparation toolkit, and I'll spend a little bit of time on each of these sections because this is kind of the bulk of our time together, is talking about preparing for your podcast guest appearances. Number 1, you want to prepare interview topics that set you up for success. So your interview topics should really showcase you specifically? What makes you different? In most industries, there are a lot of other people who do what we do. There are a lot of other people who do what you do. And there are a lot of people that want to be interviewed on podcasts. Just like I've shown you the kind of the listener growth, the same thing has happened with people wanting to be a guest on podcasts. Most podcast hosts will tell you that once their show hits 10, 15, 20 episodes, they are getting pitched every single day from people that want to be seen and heard by their audience. So there is a lot of competition. And the way that you can stand apart from the crowd and stand apart from every other guest that wants to come on and talk about something similar is have topics that are written in a way that showcases that you understand their audience's pain points and you know how to solve those pain points. That is, if I could sum it all up, that is what a podcast host wants to bring to their audience. A podcast host wants to bring a guest to their audience that is going to solve the listener's problem and help them improve in their life and their business. Because if a listener gets a solution and they get value from an episode, they're going to want to listen to the next episode because they're like, this is a show that is bringing me value. And that is what a podcast host wants. They want to grow their audience and they want their listeners to stay listening to every episode. So your interview topics need to be written in a way they're designed to appeal to the host and what they want. And what the host wants is to bring their listeners value. So really go deep. Just like in sales, you go to the root of the problem. Really speak to the root of what your target audience's pain point is, and also what your unique specialty is. There is a lot of competition and there's a lot of people that do what you do, but you are unique because of your story. Nobody has your exact experience. So make sure that you are highlighting that in your interview topics and in your interview questions. Your interview topics should also really communicate the success that you've had. This is an opportunity to really showcase how much experience you have. You can do this with questions too. Interview questions can be written in a way that sets you up to share specific stories. So having a story arsenal is also something I'll talk about today. It's having examples that support the point that you're making in your interviews. People really learn by being shown, not just told the facts. So have stories, have examples, bring people into a moment so that they can really make more of an emotional connection. When people have more of an emotional connection with you, they are going to make their way down this funnel so much faster than if they just got some information and they're like, that was helpful. But when they feel that sense of connection and that emotion, that's what says, oh, this is my person. Like, this is someone I really vibe with. I really, really like them. Next is preparing for each interview. So making sure that you are, showing up with lights on, having a podcast microphone, really being mindful of your background, being mindful of the camera on your screen. And is it at eye level? A lot of podcast interviews are video now. When I was first starting Interview Connections back, 10 years ago, they were almost all audio only on Skype. But now most podcasts are recording with video on. And while a lot of podcast listeners will hear just the audio version, the podcast host will often use video clips from the recording to promote the episode on social media. A lot of podcast hosts will upload the entire video interview to YouTube, so that video will be seen. So show up to the video, looking presentable, having good light. I raise up my laptop on, just some books to make sure that I'm not looking down at the camera. Really take into consideration the first impression that people will have of you when they see you. That is number one way to be prepared. Number two, really create space so that there is space on your calendar to settle into the interview, so that you're not rushing in from one thing to the next. Again, your energy, your mindset, like your vibration is going to have an impact on the result of that interview. And if you're so rushed and you're scattered and you're doing a bunch of different things, that's going to come across in the interview. So make sure that there is space on your calendar to really settle in and give this interview the space that it deserves so that you can really connect. Little things like having a glass of water, being hydrated, turning off all distractions. I mean, little things like if you have a certain site that's always open, like I always have HubSpot open and that dings when someone chats the website, I make sure that stuff is closed out. I close WhatsApp, like anything that is going to create a ding or an alert or something, close all of it out. That all of these little things will help you be more prepared, because the more calm and present and focused you can be in a podcast interview, the better you will perform as a guest. Other tips for preparing is really look up the host, research who the host is, listen to an episode of their show before you show up for the interview, because then you'll have an understanding of their style. You'll have an understanding of their target audience. You'll hear if the host asks every guest the same question at the end of the episode. You can come into that prepared. And you can also come to the interview, and before the host starts the recording, you can say, hey, I just listened to your episode with so-and-so, and I really liked what you guys were talking about. I really resonated with this story. Showing up and demonstrating that you have prepared and that you've taken time to get to know them and listen to their show is going to do wonders for the connection with that host. When that host sees that you took the time to prepare and to get to know them, they will appreciate you so much more, because so many people come into podcast interviews just like, oh, what show is this? Okay, who are you? Okay, great, let's do this interview. And then they're off to the next thing. But when you settle in and you really show that you took the time to support them in their show, you took the time to listen, you're asking good questions, like, tell me about your target audience, tell me about your listeners. What can I do to make this episode a home run? Or how can I make you look good in this episode? Podcast hosts are there to spotlight you. So if you can actually say, hey, I want to make sure you look good to your audience, what can I do to return that favor in this episode? That is just, most of the time they'll say, oh my gosh, I don't even know, just give a great interview. But really take the time to show that you want to help them. Just as much as you want to receive visibility, you are here to serve and to give value, because when you serve and give value and you have that mindset, you will end up receiving so much more in return than if you just went after oh, I want to get, really focus on receiving and giving so that then you can receive. And then preparing for new leads. So this is just a simple funnel. So we're going to just talk about how to really understand this funnel, because a lot of people go on podcasts and they're like, I'm going to go on a podcast and people are going to buy right away. But oftentimes people are hearing you on a podcast for the first time. And so understanding how podcast interviews fit into your overall marketing funnel is going to make a huge difference. So we're going to just talk a little bit more about interview topics. So these are some examples of what a podcast one sheet looks like. Again, they are cleanly designed. They match your branding, but I always say they're not a work of art. Sometimes people get really hung up on the design, but these are typically not one sheets or graphics that are going to be posted everywhere. So it's really something that is going to appeal to the podcast host and something that also they might print out. So that's just a little thing, but I've had a lot of podcast hosts tell me that they print out their one sheet so they can have it. Again, they're closing out all distractions, including web browsers. So it is helpful to have a white background. Of course, sometimes it makes sense to have a black background. It's all up to you and your branding. But these are just some examples. And again, speak to their pain points. Podcast hosts want to interview guests that know their target audience's pain points. Highlight your signature methodology or experience. Use your topics to spotlight your unique expertise or experience. Specify who you help, right? So in your interview topics, not just, oh, they help people do this, but who is that target audience? Who is that specific type of person that you specialize in supporting? And then with a story arsenal, so with each topic that you have on your one sheet, with each question, write out some examples of stories that you could share when you're interviewed about that topic. Write out some examples of stories that you could share when you are asked that question. And just take some time to think about that, journal it out. You'll also have stories that come to mind in interviews. Like I've shared stories on interviews that because the host asked me a question, I was like, oh, I haven't thought about that in years, but this is the story I want to share. Write that down. You might end up wanting to share that story even more after the interview. And then listen for feedback. Remain open to changing your topics as you hear feedback from podcast hosts and listeners. We always start with the best possible topics, but then as you're getting interviewed and as podcast hosts are interviewing you, and I'll just give you an example. This just came to my mind. I had a topic for a long time that was because I was talking about podcasting. I was talking about podcast guesting, and I had an interview topic about like, what are the top mistakes podcast hosts make? And I had a podcast host that was like, I was afraid to ask you that because if I had made that mistake, I would have been mortified. And it made sense in my head to address that because that like, I wanted to help podcast hosts avoid that mistake. But it also was super valuable to get that feedback that, oh, podcast hosts don't want to highlight a mistake that they may have just made, rightfully so. So I took that off my one sheet. So as you go, podcast guesting and having a one sheet, it's not set it and forget it. You create a one sheet, you write topics that you think are going to be the best fits and that are going to set you up for success, and then you listen. You do the interviews, you see the response, you get the feedback from the podcast hosts, and you'll get feedback naturally, but you can also ask hosts for feedback. Like, are there other topics that you think your target audience really wants to learn about? Because sometimes we just forget what our ideal clients really want to learn because we're up here, like we've gotten to this level of success. And our ideal clients might be really curious about this topic that we kind of forgot about. So just be open to listening, be open to hearing feedback and changing your topics as you go. All right. So again, just going over some tips for preparing for each interview, creating space on your calendar before and after. This is just a scheduling thing. I live and die by my Google Calendar. If it is not on my calendar, it is not getting done. So I literally create a buffer, especially if you're someone that has a scheduling link and people are booking calls with you. I always really create a buffer around my podcast interviews and my speaking presentations so that I'm not like back to back with one thing into another. Turn off all distractions. I'm a big fan of like listening to a good playlist because when you get energy moving through your body, when you can get up, stomp your feet, dance around, go outside, like all of that helps kind of take the stagnant energy we have from sitting at a computer, and it just kind of brings a little bit more life into you. And that chemistry, that energy really does make a difference in your interviews. I can hear such a difference when I am listening to someone's podcast interview. I can tell if they're just sort of like stagnant, like the energy is just settled versus somebody that maybe is standing while doing the interview. They're excited. Like all of that makes such a difference because I could give you every type of little tactic and thing that you can say. But at the end of the day, if your energy is not in a place of being alive and excited and present, then you're not going to attract the leads and sales that you could. Listen to their podcast again. So listen to an episode or two of the podcast that you're going to be a guest on beforehand. Research who the host of the show is. Podcast guesting is just as much a networking strategy as it is a visibility strategy. So a lot of people go into podcast guesting just thinking about visibility to an audience. How can I get on shows with lots of listeners? But what they often forget is a lot of times the value and the investors and the deals and the sales that you can get from podcast guesting come from your relationship with a single podcast host. So really focus on your relationship with the host of the show. They are the person that has a lot of trust with their audience. So really focus on your relationship with the host, get to know them. Just like I recommend listening to an episode of their show, maybe go find a podcast where the host was a guest. Listen to that, really learn about who they are, connect with them on social media beforehand. So LinkedIn probably is a platform we're all on. Connect with the host beforehand. Post that you are getting interviewed on their podcast. leave a positive rating and review on their show. Do anything you can to give them value and help give them more visibility, because that is what they're doing for you by interviewing you. So anything that you can do to return that favor and help them, when the guest and the host are both trying to help each other, like all boats rise in high tide. So really just keep that mindset and that focus of how can I help the host? How can I help them? How can I help their audience? Because when that is where your mindset is, you will attract so many more results than if your mindset was just like, how can I get a lot out of this appearance? And then release expectations. I am convinced that the key to like all disappointment is just from a missed expectation. You expected it to go one way and it went another way. You expected this type of result and you didn't get that result. And that's where the disappointment comes in. So this is kind of a very like Buddhist way of thinking, but just release your expectations, have goals, right? Like have things that you want, go for certain results, but release the expectation and the attachment and the grabbiness onto how you think it should go. Because when you release that expectation and you really just focus on being present and being someone that is there to be of service, and just do all that you can to prepare. But then once you show up, you do your best, you do your best work, you give the best possible interview, you do your best in that moment, and then be ready to receive. And then prepare to monetize. So this is really important. The best thing that you can do. So we've talked all about now being present, and now we're going to talk about how to make sure you monetize your interviews, because this isn't just like just be calm and be present and you'll get lots of sales. We are going to talk now about being strategic and doing the things you need to do to attract those monetize that money. So prepare a call to action. So these are my 4 rules of thumb with a podcast call to action. So number 1, free or low cost. So podcast listeners, they are most of the time hearing you for the first time. Some maybe have heard you a bunch of times and they're ready to buy, but most of the time, a podcast listener is hearing you for the very first time. They may not be ready to invest yet in what you're selling. So to maximize conversions and to get as many people coming into this funnel as possible, offer them something for free or low value, like a book or something like that. So this could be getting them into, honestly, it could be getting them into touch with you for a call. It could be getting them connected with you on LinkedIn. It could be a free lead magnet or an offer, a special report, a Facebook group. I could go on, but something free that gets them into your funnel. It should be high value and relevant. So your call to action should be a gift, like a lead magnet or a way to connect with you that is highly valuable and relevant to what you spoke about in the interview. It should be one thing. Again, a confused mind says no. So when you tell them a million different things they could do to connect with you or to find you online, not only will they likely forget it, but we as people, and especially as entrepreneurs, we have decision fatigue. So if someone tells me decide between these 5 things, I'm like, I don't know, just tell me what to do. Like you tell me where I should go. So give them one thing, because a confused mind will just say no and they won't know where to go. Or they'll go take this action that you're not really paying attention to. Like maybe they go follow you on Instagram, but that's not really your priority platform. So you're not really checking those messages. Give them one thing. And then keep it simple. You don't have to over-engineer a whole funnel because you're getting interviewed on podcasts. I've got clients who have had amazing returns on investment and they give their email address or they say, connect with me on LinkedIn. Like it can be very, very simple. You don't have to over-engineer a very complicated marketing funnel in order to have success with podcast guesting. All right. And now I want to give you some bonus tips about how to leverage your interviews, because an hour of your time can create hundreds of pieces of content for your marketing. And an hour of your time on a podcast interview is an investment into so many different aspects of your business. So you can take interviews you've done and edit clips and post them on social media. So when you're interviewed on a podcast, we have a client that will literally set up her own camera and record herself from a different point of view. And she'll use that. And she'll also get the recording from the host and then chop that up, because really engaging social media clips are like 15 to 30 seconds. And if a 30, 45-minute podcast interview, there are hundreds of 30 to 45-second clips where you're sharing a story, where you're giving a tip, where you're talking about your topic that can then be used on social media. You can also add your interview appearances to your media page or your website. And this is a way to showcase your credibility. It really sets you apart as being an authority figure and someone that is speaking about your business and your topic and your industry, in addition to having, being an investor and having a service in it. You can transcribe and edit your podcast interviews into written content. So if you're not a writer, but you love getting interviewed and you love speaking, you can transcribe your interviews and then repurpose them into written social media content, into blog articles, into pillar pages on your website. So there's so much that you can do. You can take podcast interviews you've done and transcribe them all and make a book. You can have a whole ebook, a whole book from content that you've created by being interviewed on podcasts. You can share takeaways on social media. So in addition to actually repurposing and editing clips from your interviews, you can actually go on social media and say, hey, I was just interviewed on this podcast, and this is something I shared with the host, or this is something that the host asked me. And that is a way that you can actually increase inbound interview requests. Because if you are talking with your audience on social media about how you're getting interviewed, people are going to see that and say, oh, I have a podcast. You want to come on my podcast? So it's a way to actually multiply your visibility and increase the inbound requests that you're getting. And you can also upload your interviews to your YouTube channel. So just like the host will upload it to their YouTube channel and post it, you can also do the same. And then, just also, this is great for your search engine optimization. Every time you're on a podcast, you're going to have a link back to your website. So that way, when people are Googling you and what you do, you're going to come up so much more frequently than if you hadn't done any podcast interviews. So this is a strategy that can truly be leveraged and repurposed in 100 different ways. And being prepared, both for each interview appearance, but also just being prepared, understanding this whole scope and understanding how this plays a role into your overall business growth strategy is really the key. Understanding that this is brand awareness, this is visibility, this is getting you visible to audiences who don't yet know who you are, and then having that call to action that gets them into your funnel. That is really the key, because when you understand all of that, it's really just about implementing and getting on the core and doing these interviews consistently to then see the results. So now we are right about ready for our Q&A, right on time. So we would love to support you. This is what we do at Interview Connection. So if you are interested in learning more, you can reach out either directly to my email or just to head on over to our website. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and answer any questions that you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. A lot of great points you made. And I think it's really important. It's a process. And I think that's the biggest thing. But I love what you said about how can you help, the hosts, how can you help the show versus, what do I want to talk about? Right? Because it is about connecting to the audiences you want to connect to and in the way that they need it when you reach out. That's what's going to make a timely story. So let's talk about a few things here. I got Dawn, you had a question here, and I encourage everyone to add any questions in the Q&A box. You have someone who literally books podcasts for how many people, Jessica? A lot.
150, 200.
Yeah. So a couple hundred people. She knows a thing or two about getting people on shows. So let's tap into her expertise, because I think that's always the one of the coolest things about our webinars, right? So Dawn asks, hey, Dawn, if I want to grow my brand, what would be a good schedule for guesting on podcasts? Can you speak on the applying for guest interviews?
Yeah. So when you say schedule, I don't know if Dawn's talking about like pace, like how often to get interviewed. I'll answer that, but then feel free to clarify. So, I recommend at least like 3 interviews per month. We could just give a range like 2 to 4, because consistency is really important in podcast guesting, not only because you want to be consistently visible, and people sometimes will listen to you multiple times. Like they'll hear you on one show and they're like, oh, I really liked her. Let me go listen to her on another show. So being consistent and being out there, but it also helps you improve as a guest. Like your first podcast interview as a guest, like you might be like kind of figuring things out. Like you're like, okay, well, how do I land that story? But then the more you do it, the better you get. So you want to do it consistently and then applying for guests. So, pitching podcast hosts is all about appealing to what they are looking for. Podcast hosts want guests that are going to bring value to their audience, and they want guests that understand and have done their homework. This is something I hear all the time from podcast hosts. They are tired of people pitching them who haven't done a lick of preparation and research into who their audience is and what their show is. So pitching, you're like, hey, I looked up your show. I can see that you're speaking to X audience. I can see that your show is about this, and this is why I think I'd be a great guest. This is a topic I could talk about. Just clearly saying that you know who their audience is, customize that part. And that's a mistake a lot of people make is they write a pitch and then they blast the same pitch out to every single show with zero customization or anything like that. And it just shows like, wait, you didn't even look up what my show is, or I don't even take guests. So just do a little bit of homework to customize that outreach. And what our team often does too is like, we'll ask hosts before we even pitch someone, we'll say, hey, we've got some clients, like, what are you looking for? So you could do that too. You could just ask the host, hey, what are you looking for? What types of guests? So then you can ask them, are you open to suggestions? And that will give you a foot in the door.
Yeah. Great suggestion. The worst things when we get pitched on people to be on our podcast, I get all these guys like, I got a great guest to, have you interview. Joe Schmo from Long Island. I'm like, we've done 400 episodes.
Yeah.
You looked into our show. It's only women. Like they don't even, deserve a response, which is sort of funny, but that happens all the time. Right. And people waste the effort. I don't know how many requests I get for men being on our show, but anyway, Tracy, you are asking, as someone who's considering starting a new podcast of your own, do you have any recommendations for finding the right guests for your show?
Yeah. So it's really about like, I think the number one thing is, who do you want to talk to? I can tell when a host is just going through the motions and just interviewing people that came on the show because they just want to like put out an episode. The best podcasts are ones where the host really wants to talk to that person. So number one, who do you want to talk to? Who are you interested in? Who are you genuinely curious about talking to? And then from there, like, who is your target audience? Who do they want to hear from? What do they want to learn about? So I think you really have to get clarity on why you're starting a podcast. What's the purpose of it? I mean, I know a lot of business owners that it's purely a networking strategy. Like, I don't really care how many listeners I have. I'm doing this because I want to interview people that are in my target market. And I think that's super smart. Like that is a strategy. But if, you just have to really be clear about what are your goals? Why are you doing this podcast? Who do you want to talk to? Who do you want to reach? And then once you kind of list all that out, there should be some more clarity on the ideal type of guest.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do that a lot, right? Where you're like, okay, what is the outcome of this show and why are we talking to them? And what do the people listening need to get from it? And that all takes thought and preparation, but that's really what good shows are doing. They're not just like showing up and asking the same questions, right? Mel Robbins does it really well. It's like, we found this expert on neuroscience, on drama, whatever topic she's talking about. She always connects the dots. So I think more people need to connect the dots versus just a pure interview, right? It's like, we brought this person on to talk about this, and this is why, right?
I love that. Like listing out what are the topics you want to bring to your audience and then finding a great guest who can speak on that topic.
Correct. Yeah. Versus just taking anyone. So, I think it's also comes back to, at least from more, not so much where Jessica's coming from working with a lot of people. I can just speak from my own experience with podcasting. The other key is, who do you want to serve? And I think not enough people get like, who do I want to talk? What do I want to talk about? And like, what are the pains of who do you want to serve and what are their pains? And their pains are going to evolve, right? So we serve women. We serve women who are growing their portfolios and they have certain pains and challenges. And we become obsessed with knowing them so we can serve them. And I don't know if enough people podcasting, or you being even on a podcast, like, how do I solve the avatar's pain, me being on this podcast? And then that's another way to think of it too.
Yeah. And also like podcasting, I talked a little bit about like the story arsenal, but this is a platform to share stories and to get vulnerable and to like go so much deeper in a topic than you can on a social media post or in an app. So I think stories is just such an important aspect of podcast guesting, and finding guests, if you're hosting a show, that will go deep and actually like talk about their failures and talk about their because that's what makes a podcast interesting to me.
Yeah, that's easy to listen to. All right, Wendy, thanks so much for being on. Wendy, you said this is super helpful. What are your thoughts about using LinkedIn? Mine has a lot of earlier career info, which a lot of ours do, right? When we shift things, not related to real estate investing, or should she create a new one?
So I don't think you need to create a new one. I think it's just going to evolve. Like you just start, change the bio, like update your, up kind of about section of your LinkedIn. Like you can just kind of give it a facelift, a glow up, a revamp, a rebrand, like whatever phrase you want to use. But as you're growing and evolving in your business into a new industry or whatever the case, you just edit it, you just change it and evolve it. I mean, if I look back 10 years at my social media, I mean, if you don't look back 10 years and feel embarrassed by what you were posting or how you were presenting, like you were all growing and evolving. So I think you don't have to start over or start something new, just edit it, change it, and it'll grow with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, right? We feel like we often have to be like perfect. And we could say, this is what I used to do. This is what I'm doing now. This is how it's evolved. And it shows kind of color to your journey. And it's a journey, versus like, I just woke up and, I'm 49 years old and I'm starting a podcast. What have you been doing? It's like, so it really, Wendy, you can really tie it into your story. Like, what is your story? And that's another thing I'd say is like, what is your story? You can only tell your story. And as a podcast host, as a podcast guest, no one can tell your story the way you need to tell it. So knowing that and really honing that, I think is really important for being a guest or really having your own show. Because I think there's so much richness in that, and so many people don't go there. So I just wanted to say that too. All right, we'll take one more question, and then Jessica, you've been amazing. So thanks for all the great insight. Michelle, hey Michelle from Canada, one of our Strive members. She said, on the LinkedIn social media vein, is it better to focus on you as the brand or your company?
I think it really depends on what the goal is. I know it's kind of like a social media question, but just thinking through the lens of podcasting and podcast guesting, I really focusing on you personally. And it's good to have a business page. It's good to have a company page where you're active on. But podcast hosts want to interview people and they want to interview individuals. So I do think it's really important for you as an individual to be out there. And it's funny, our client, Mark Ritter, is the CEO of a financial services company, credit union. And we told him, you're like, you really need to have a personal brand. And he was like kicking and screaming, like, no. And I'm like, people want to know who you are. And so now like he has his own podcast and his own website and stuff like that. And it was a really important lesson for him to see that, oh, people really do connect with me. And so, yes, build a company brand, but also building your personal brand is going to help open doors to people that want to connect with you personally.
Really important. I love that. Jessica, if you want to throw in the chat box how they can get in touch with you one last time, that would be great. I will, and that's helpful to do. And I'll also put in here, perfect. I think like anything, we have to really hone our skills and know that we have a story to tell. And we even need to know what that story is. And sometimes you just need some support, in getting there. So before you can be a guest, before you can be a host, knowing your story and just knowing that you have a story to tell in your own unique way and as succinct as you can, the better. Go deep but brief. But this has been great, Jessica. You've added a lot of value. Everyone's saying thank you so much. Taking notes and really about do something with this. If you can, before we jump, please write one action step that you're being inspired to take as a result of today's webinar, because that's also the goal of all of our webinars, right? Anything we do, this wasn't just an entertaining, you spent time here, you spent energy, and that's the greatest gift you can give people is your time. Quite honestly, it's the one finite thing we have. Everything else is infinite. Time is not. Time is finite. So please share if you can, in the chat box, one thing you are going to create or do, even a small step as a result. Doesn't have to be a huge step, small step, micro step. We always talk about on Jess and I. So update my LinkedIn. Very cool. Call Jessica to schedule guest interviews. All right. Great stuff. Creating my podcast one sheet, creating my story. And I would say, Michelle, you don't have to create your story. You have to discover it and kind of own it. You have the story. You have a unique story, only you can tell. Now it's just a matter of honing that, right? And saying, okay, how can I help other people? What is mine to share? in the way I need to share it, you know? So very true. Good stuff. All right. Thanks again so much, Jessica. Appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you for being on today. And we do these twice a month, various topics, real estate investing, business, which this is more business, and self-care. That's the 3 pillars we stand upon. So Jessica, thanks again. And everyone, thank you for sharing your Monday with us. All right. Have a great day. Oh, contact info. Jessica, her contact info was in, Jessica. Dawn, her contact info was right here in the chat box here. So you should be all set. Okay. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye now.